Wisdom, you can mute them. Yeah. We are on the 39th verse. I think
Yeah, 39.
last time we completed the 38th.
Yeah.
We will be starting with the 39th verse. Let me share the screen. We will take up the 39th verse. It says, Atmanyevakhilam drishyam pravilapya dhiya sudhihi bhavayed ekamatmanam nirmalakashavat sada. The wise one should intelligently merge the entire objective world in Atman alone and constantly think of that Atman as the stainless sky. See, the whole of the creation is called as Drishyam, or that which is seen, or the object of sight, and other senses also. Now, a Sudhihi, that means one who is wise, one who is of an excellent faculty of discrimination. With his faculty of discrimination, one is supposed to merge the entire Drishyam, merge the entire phenomenal world in the Atman, and consider the Atman alone constantly, sada. And a comparison is given as to how the Atman is to be considered. It should be considered as the Nirmala Akasha, as the pure, unsullied, stainless sky. Earlier also we have discussed that when you refer to the sky, it has two dimensions or two aspects to it. One is its vastness. It appears to be infinite. And the other is that it is uniform, undivided, and untouched by anything. Actually, when you say the sky or Akasha as a tattva, it's not exactly there in the sense, it's not something tangible like the other four elements of fire or air or water or the earth. The Akasha, if you remember our earlier discussions, I made a mention that it is a medium for the flow and expanse of consciousness and energy. Consciousness and energy are not two different things. But when we talk about energy, there is a physicality to it. There is a phenomenal aspect associated with energy. which is not the case with the Atman, with the consciousness. Consciousness has no phenomenal association per se and comes into manifestation only through various embodiments. When there is this manifestation of subtler and grosser bodies and material, consciousness manifests through them. Now, the question is, the suggestion being made in this particular verse. It says the wise one should intelligently merge the entire objective world in Atman. Alone. Atmanyeva. Akhilam Drishyam. The entire objective world has to be pravilapya, has to be merged into the Atman. Now, this is a very strange suggestion in one way. When we do not know the Atman, how do we merge that which is much more tangible to us into it? There is a suggestion to merge the tangible into the intangible, of the known into the unknown, is a strange way of putting things. The next 2-3 verses also talk about the same dimension, same aspect of it. We will come to it, but let us understand one fundamental issue. A fundamental issue is, how do we perceive what is called as unity? In the phenomenal world, there is infinite variety, isn't it? We see that there is variety in everything and anything. For example, not two human beings are alike in any manner whatsoever. Even from a very gross point of view, each one is unique and there is nothing common as such. Similarly, you take any object in the universe, it has a distinctive and unique identity of its own, which appears to be impinging on our senses very seriously, in the sense they impinge on our senses, and our senses are able to see the variegated nature of all manifestation. But at the same time, the buddhi, the human faculty, or what is called as the higher dimension of mental faculties, have a very unique capability of perceiving unity in the form of what is called as an archetype. See, for example, when we see that each human being is different in every respect possible, but still there is what is called as the humanness. I think there is some resounding somewhere. Somebody has. All are muted, Binaji? Okay. In between, my own voice was echoing. So there is this, what is called as this archetype. in spite of the fact every human being is different, or every dog is different, or every cat is different, every tree is different, every stone is different, there is what is called as this archetype of what we call as a human being, which means what makes a human being a human being. There is an essential commonality and there is an essential identity which allows us to see the unity of the dimension which we are calling it as the humanness. That's what in the tradition and in the scriptures is called as the tattva, the thatness of a thing. So similarly, there is a catness of all cats, there is a dogness of all dogs, there is a treeness of all trees, there is a chairness or a tableness of all the tables and chairs in the world, even those which have not yet been produced. So this particular verse is asking us to recognize that factor which brings about to our consciousness the identity of a principle of commonness and unity. So there is this principle pertaining to the entire drishyam, pertaining to the entire objective world. So can we go behind this variety and variation and the infinite, what do you call as the variegated nature of things? Can we perceive that unity? That is precisely what is meant by merging the objective world in the Atman. This is one dimension of it as far as the external objective world is concerned. There is another dimension to this whole thing. The other dimension is that everything in this universe is pervaded by the consciousness of that divinity, which is referred to as the Brahman. Now, that consciousness also can be seen as something which is common to everybody and everything and is associated with everything in manifestation. There is a consciousness in a tree, or instead of consciousness, we are calling that as a life principle when it is associated with something gross, something which is visible to the senses, or that which can be perceived by the senses. So this is another common factor. Common in the sense, anything and everything and everybody, every living form and the so-called non-living forms, because in our scriptures there's nothing like a non-living thing. It is either movable or immovable. It is jangama or ajangama. It is chara or achara. That means things have mobility, things and entities have either mobility or no mobility. When you say no mobility also, the mobility could be very restricted. Like in the case of a tree, the tree itself doesn't move, but the branches and leaves and flowers and things, they move. Then you can compare with something which may seem to be totally immobile, like a stone or a mountain or a hill. So you see, we don't consider anything as non-living. Therefore, everything is in some form or the other has this life principle imbued in it. So perceiving this life principle is also very, very important, because that gives us a sense of oneness with everything. That gives us a sense of oneness with everything, you see. That is very important, because whatever be our state of mind or expression of life through this embodiment called our body, it always acts on the principle that it should not be hurt, isn't it? We don't want to be hurt in any manner whatsoever, by word or action or gesture or a thought or a feeling or an emotion or any form of expression. So when that is my state of being, forget about spirituality and everything, forget about everything. Any human being or any living creature wants to sustain life, wants to continue its own life in whatever manner it is manifesting, and avoids everything which may be hurtful to it, or which may be damaging to it, or which may cause the loss of that life principle. So when, as human beings, when we recognize this factor of unity of the life principle and consciousness flowing through the whole system of manifestation, and when as a human being I do not want to get hurt, obviously it is my bounden duty and responsibility to see that I do not hurt anybody or anything. So if you come to this understanding, you will behave in the most responsible manner in this world. You and I, everybody would behave in the most responsible manner on this planet. But is it happening? Obviously not. The dichotomy or the irony of the whole thing is, I don't want to get hurt, but I don't mind hurting the whole world. Because I have divided myself into the me and the not me. The me is something which is related very narrowly to my body, my thoughts, my emotions, my feelings, my house, my property, my children, my wife, my grandchildren, my pleasure-seeking mode. So you start with the personal identity and expand that identity in some manner and call that as yourself or the me, and everything else as not me, and I don't mind exploiting, hurting, causing damage to that not me, without realizing the fact that the not me is actually allowing me to survive. So see the foolishness of the human mind. I survive on the not me, called as the trees and plants and fruits and vegetables and water and so many things for my own sustenance. But I do not mind creating any amount of damage with impunity, with total impunity, with total disregard, which is a foolishness, which is the foolishness under which we are operating. And therefore the verse says, whom does this advice of a merger of the entire objective world in the Atman is being addressed to? It is addressed to a Sudhihi. It is addressed to a wise man. Then a wise man also it says, should use his discrimination, dhiya. And that too constantly. A wise man does not remain a wise man if he doesn't use his wisdom, his understanding. So there is every possibility of the wise man becoming foolish at any moment and lose the sight of his responsibility. Now imagine such a wise man to be there. Without any effort, automatically so many things become irrelevant to him and unwanted, and things with which he will not indulge in at all. He would not indulge in any of these things at all. And that too effortlessly. He's not shunning all these things with lot of effort, saying that I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to eat that, I'm not going to do like that, I'm not. It's not that. That wisdom provides the background which says that you have to consume the minimum requirement for your own sustenance, for the sustenance of actually the physical body. Leave alone the other things. The Bhagavad Gita, the Bhashya, Adi Shankara's Bhashya of the Bhagavad Gita says that the wise man lives in this world in a manner just to keep his body and soul together. That's all. The soul is an English term. Let us take it as the Atman. The Atman manifesting this through this Sharira, he will ensure the bare minimum that is required to sustain this manifestation of that Atman through this body. And this is not being done forcefully. This is not being done forcefully. Please see that. Okay. So it is being done effortlessly because of the operation of the wisdom or intelligence. And a beautiful simile is given where it should be like the vast and uniform stainless Akasha. Because the Akasha is vast, infinitely vast, is uniform. Every unit of Akasha is exactly the same as every other unit. And nothing touches it. Nothing brings about disequilibrium in that Akasha. Nothing causes imbalance. So in that manner, one should be able to visualize this Atman. And by understanding these two principles of that everything in manifestation, though has variety, it also has a principle which is called as the thatness of it. If I know the humanness of the human being, then all human beings are one for me. If I know the treeness of a tree, all trees in this manifestation are one for me. So from an objective point of view also, you can see this oneness. And from a subjective point of view of consciousness or life principle also, you can see this unity. Then the merger of it becomes effortless. And my life becomes absolutely simple. Not even one in a million things in this world is something which is required for me. There are millions and millions of things in this world, but they don't have any valid, they don't have any utility value to me. Because my sole purpose is to behave in a responsible manner, whereby neither do I damage the variety of manifestation, nor do I create any problem for the expression of the life principle in operation in the entire manifestation. See, this is the deeper aspect which we have to understand. Because superficially, it may appear that somebody is asking the wise one should intelligently merge the entire objective world in Atman alone. What does that statement mean? The statement means nothing actually. If you look at it superficially, it means nothing. Who is a wise fellow? And what is that intelligence you are talking about? And what is this nonsense of merging the entire objective world into the Atman? When I do not know the Atman at all, except in terms of negation. But if you understand this common factor, which is the basis and root of everything in manifestation, and also the expression of the life principle in everything in manifestation, then effortlessly it is possible to bring about this merger of the entire manifested universe in the sense the wisdom and that intelligence will dictate you to always perceive that unity in all respects, whether objectively or subjectively. That is the basic idea that we need to understand here. Ramchandranji, there is a chat. No, see the point I am trying to make, Ramchandranji, it is not an intellectual exercise, sir. It is not an intellectual exercise which is required at a certain stage to see the Nama, Rupa, Asti, Bhati and Priya. It is that wisdom which dictates to us the principle of unity both objectively and subjectively. I hope I am making myself clear. I'll stop sharing this for some time and then look at the layout. Read. Almost everybody is invisible except Beenaji, because we happen to be the host and co-host, and we cannot afford to be invisible. So all the others have simply given up their name and form. Name is appearing in some form here, but they have given up their form completely. Now, what I am trying to say is it clear? See, I want you to kindly understand very clearly that even with our limited mental consciousness, within the framework of which we are functioning, we can see the principle of unity without too much effort on our part. Knowledge requires effort. Wisdom doesn't require effort. Knowledge has content as its basis, whereas wisdom has no content. Our wisdom should be such that this principle of unity in the objective world and the subjective world should be very, very clear to us. Is it there or not? That is what is my question. There is some post by Vijay Lakshmi ji. Sir, it would be a travesty if after so many sessions of yours, we still are not able to see the unity. No, no. See, the point is, while talking, it may appear to be okay. But the moment I am out of it, I myself may not be able to see this unity. Because the force of the diversity and the not me is so powerful, and the way it constantly impinges on all our six senses, the sixth sense being the mind, it impinges so vehemently and strongly that we lose sight of this unity. The moment we go into the market, we get into an aggressive mode to bargain with the vegetable vendor, with the auto driver, or with somebody else, and the mind tells you that this fellow is likely to cheat you, don't get cheated, so we try to act very smart and all that. So in all circumstances, when he says sada, constantly, it also means in every circumstance, in all situations, are we able to perceive this unity? So it is not so easy. Vijay Lakshmi ji, you may be right that we are constantly dwelling upon this, but it may not be so evident because we, as I mentioned earlier, we will fall back into foolishness. We are occasionally wise. When we attend the webinars or come to the School of Ancient Wisdom or somewhere else, when these discourses are going on, we may have a semblance of that wisdom, but in real life, do we have it? Yes, you are right that we can aspire to be aware of it because it's not a one-time affair. It's not a one-time affair. That's another fallacy about what we call as freedom or moksha or liberation or emancipation or nirvana or whatever name you give. It's not a one-time affair that once you have achieved it, like your SSC qualification or something, you got a certificate. Yes, sir, I am free. Somebody gives you a certificate that you are mukta now. You have become a jivan mukta. So that is a foolish thing because it's a state of being which is timeless, which is beyond space, time, and causation. Whereas we are stuck in space, time, and causation most of the time. So that is the beauty of it. See, actually, for somebody who perceives it, it is very, very simple and effortless. For us, it may appear to be like a good mental concept or an idea or an expression of something else, which is appreciated by the mind. But the moment we are actively engaged in the world, the mind tells you that all that nonsense this fellow has talked is all theoretical. We need to be very practical in this world. That's why repeatedly, when Krishnamurti was questioned about it, Ritu Krishnamurti, so many people asked him, and even youngsters. There's a beautiful video with the school children in Rishi Valley. And there is with a lot of grown-ups in Sanen in Australia, where every year he used to conduct the a program for a fortnight. Repeatedly, people have asked him. I was surprised to see a small boy also saying, "Sir, if what you are talking, we will not be able to live in this world." And even for the boy, Krishnaji's answer was the same. He said, "Don't live. Don't live. Because I am not talking about a choice here. The choice is for the foolish. See, let us even argue from a logical and reasonable perception or point of view. How many things, in how many ways a thing can go wrong? When you talk about wrong, it is almost infinite. Or even when I'm talking about doing something wrong, in how many ways I can do something wrong? There's no limit to it. But look at the other way around. In how many ways can I do something right? There can be only one way. For doing the right, there can be only one way and no two ways at all. So that is precisely what he means, that the right is something which is choiceless. Nanyah pantha ayanaya vidyate is the Vedic mantra which says there is no other path to go. There is no other way. There is only one way. There is no choice. There is no multiplicity. Multiplicity is which is bound with choice is for the foolish. But for something right, it's only one thing. And this is expressed in a very beautiful manner by an Urdu poet. An Urdu poet says, "Sach बढ़े या घटे तो सच नहीं रहता." Truth is truth. You can neither increase it nor decrease it. सच बढ़े या घटे तो सच नहीं रहता. झूठ की कोई इंतहा ही नहीं. There is no end to jhoot. For falsehood, there is no end to it. That's the principle in operation. The right can only be one. Whereas if you talk about, say, in how many ways a person can cheat, there can be a million ways one can cheat. But honesty, does it have a variety or choice? So it is precisely that we are talking about. So from a logical point of view, from a reasonable point of view, from an intuitive point of view also, it is very, very evident that the principle of unity should be manifest to us constantly and in every action, every thought, every word in our life. And again, I would like to emphasize and say it is not a one-time affair. Please don't look at it as one-time affair. Yesterday I was very honest, sir. Yesterday I could see the unity. Now I am only seeing diversity. That means we are falling back into the same trap, into that foolishness. And that loss of wisdom or intelligence is what causes decay. Without attaining unity, is there an escape from samsara problems ever? Are you asking me a question, or are you hoping that I will give an answer which will help you to escape? Ramchandranji, are you hoping for an answer, positive answer from me?
Sarji, my doubt is that to my understanding, unless we can, as you said, the unity or divinity is perceived in everything, the samsara cannot go away. Or is there
Obviously.
Is there any other way? That's what I
No other way. It can't be. It can't be. That's what I was emphasizing. There cannot be any choice. The very perception of that unity will see that the whole of this manifestation becomes irrelevant to you.
True.
See, the Mandukya Upanishad mantra is a very great mantra.
Yes.
You see, when it says adrishtam, avyavaharyam, agrahyam, alakshanam, achintyam, avyapadeshyam, it adds a term called prapanchopashamam.
Yes.
Prapanchopashamam means that the whole manifested universe ceases for you. Upashama means to become dormant and irrelevant for you. And Atmaika Pratyasaram, Ekatma Pratyasaram, it is that essence of that unity of the Atman alone. Coming back to the same thing, sir, Ramana Maharshi said it very simply, there is no other.
No other.
Finished. How can you have a conflict with in any manner in this world?
No way.
Because there is no other. How can you be in conflict with yourself? A foolish person can be in conflict with himself also. That's not not a big problem for him. My grandfather used to say that this fellow is so foolish that even if nobody is there, he can fight with the wall, he can fight with the air, he can take up a quarrel with a pillar. That kind of foolishness also is there in manifestation. We see because once a man becomes is clouded by that ajnana or avidya or that ignorance and foolishness, there is no end to his suffering. There is no end to this nonsense for anybody, for us also.
I have a question here.
Yes, sir.
Like you have been saying, it's easy to say there is no other.
Right.
But there are others with their own feelings, problems, and interactions, and
Right.
we have to face them. As you
Right.
said, we might have done some mistake, they may not forgive, forget.
Right.
All sorts of relationship issues are there. You can't just say no other.
No, sir, Janakiramji, the answer to that, see, Jiddu Krishnamurti has answered that in a different way. You don't respond. You don't react to it. You, in the sense, the entity called as Krishnapani or Janakiram, with all this nonsense which he calls as the content of his consciousness, which is the me. My background, my degrees, my qualifications, my experience, my wife, my children, my relations, my man, my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions, all that nonsense is the content of the consciousness. If you are reacting and responding from that content of consciousness, there is no possibility at all. Krishnamurti said, if you are in that state where intelligence operates, that intelligence will dictate the right action for everything and anything and in every situation. The fact of the matter is we don't allow that intelligence to operate. He was asked very strange questions sometimes. Sir, you sitting here with all comforts and all, and now you are already 70, 80 years, 90 years, you don't have wife, children, family, nothing. You can talk all kinds of nonsense. But suppose I will give you a hypothetical question. Suppose you are going with your sister on the road. It is slightly dark. 4 fellows come and grab her and rape her in front of you. Then how do you react? Krishnaji was very cool to that. He said, sir, I don't do anything. I'll allow that intelligence to operate, and that intelligence will dictate what is to be done. And that intelligence may dictate you to fight and kill those fellows also. You see the point? What that intelligence dictates is not you don't know. It's not of your concern also. That is precisely where the Bhagavad Gita comes into picture. The Bhagavad Gita says, don't take it personally. I am not asking Arjuna personally to attack all these fellows and kill. You operate from that intelligence, which is manifest in me as the Krishna, and I am the one who is dictating to you. That intelligence is dictating to you that it is your bounden duty to kill a fellow who is on the side of adharma. Personally, that fellow was terribly scared. Personally, that fellow was in a depression. He was in a completely confused state of mind. He didn't know what to do and all. So what is it that Krishna has given him? Krishna has given him that intelligence to operate. And what operated through that is the intelligence of the presence of Krishna, whose sole purpose was to re-establish dharma and eliminate adharma, which is unfortunately manifesting in huge dimensions. So you see, we always make that mistake of imagining situations in which we think it is much more practical to do certain things as dictated by our own background, our own personality and our own mind, instead of allowing that intelligence to operate. You see the dimension of it. That intelligence will allow you. And maybe if you are constantly in that in that level of consciousness where that intelligence operates, you will be avoiding 99.9999% of the problems. So simply they will not come to you at all. Because that intelligence will allow you to operate in a state where none of these things can even approach you. It is our own foolishness, it is our own karma, it is our own doing, and it's our own predilections and propensities and desires and our own emotions which are allowing us to get, more and more into this quagmire of what is called as the samsara. Janakiram, am I clear?
Very clear. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Because this is, yes.
When there is no psychological involvement or demand, truth then operates on reality through intelligence.
Yeah, that is what we are supposed to do. If you allow your psyche, your personality, your accumulated knowledge and your memories and your experiences to interfere in the matter, there will be no end to the problems. You have to shift from EKM to EAR.
And JD also gave another acronym, JAR.
Yes.
Non-judgment, non-attachment, non-resistance.
Yes. No, there won't be any possibility of that. Getting attached or resisting anything. That dimension, because we don't know, we are unwilling to accept it.
Krishnapani,
yes.
That intelligence that we talk about actually operates in the present moment. I mean, it operates
Yes.
in the moment because then it's not clouded by your previous thoughts or your future fears or anything like that, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, because the intelligence or this wisdom can only be in the present. It cannot be associated with the time in any form. So you can constantly dwell in that timeless state. And as I mentioned earlier also, see, the division of time into past, present and future is a total myth. It is totally an artificial creation of this mind. How do you differentiate that line which you call as the present, dividing the past and the future? How finely can you define it? Can you define it in terms of nanoseconds, picoseconds, 10 to the power of minus 26 or minus 36 is past, and 10 to the power of 1 by 10 to the power of 36 is into the future. See, it is 1 billionth of a billionth of a billionth second of a second is still undefinable. That is why they call this as the mithya. That is why they call this as unreal, because actually this difference is not there. only when you are in a state of experiencing, even physically, if I am eating something very tasty and very pleasurable, as long as I am eating, as long as the contact of that item with my taste buds is there, I am experiencing it. After some time, it will become the past, and the next morsel becomes the future.
If you even think it's tasty, it's the past.
Yeah, it's past, it's gone, because it is that experience is converting it into knowledge and memory. So it is so fast, it is so swift in its action, and that's why he says when you're observing yourself also, why you require that total attention is that a fraction of a second of inattention, you will miss the swiftness of it. It is so swift that you will miss it. Like you're observing a flowing stream. The moment you divert your attention and look at something else, a lot of water has already flown past. So this is the nature of the truth which we are talking about. So this dimension cannot be caught by the mind, which is trained for something else. It is trained for something else totally. That is I hope I am making myself clear to the others also.
Very clear. In this context, in the mind, in chapter 10, Krishna says, I am the mind.
Yes, I am also the mind, because the consciousness is functioning through that. Because you have to exhaust your karma also in the process. I can only provide you guidance, and not because of some favoritism or doing you something. See, I am here to restore the balance. I'll use anybody and everybody for my purpose. I have no qualms about it. I have no preferences. That's why he says in the Bhagavad Gita, at one point he says, such a person is dear to me. But in a different context, he says, nobody is dear to me at all. I have no friends, no enemies, no nothing. I am only beings in ignorance and beings out of ignorance. That's all. Yes, sir. Umesh ji.
Sir, I have 2 points.
Yes.
Point 1 about intelligence. Is intelligence not the sum of the accumulated sanskaras?
No. No, we are not talking about intelligence as an English word.
Okay.
That intelligence quotient, or somebody being smart and very fast in thinking and calculations or doing things or understand. No, it's not that. Intelligence refers to that state of consciousness which is able to perceive this unity. Is that aspect of it? Yes. So unfortunately, as I said, as I have been saying, we are forced to use these terms in English which do not actually convey the meaning, can convey the sense of what the scripture is actually saying. Yes, sir. Second point.
About the Akasha we spoke about, concerning Akasha, is there anything physical form of Akasha? Because as you look up and you say that's Akasha, when you go higher up, you still look up.
Yes.
It's continuous looking up. So is it not nothingness is Akasha?
No, there is nothingness. Actually, there is no physicality to it. And that is the reason why most of the cultures did not take that into consideration at all. They only talked about 4 elements. Air, fire, water and earth only. You see, most of the cultures have talked about these 4 only. They never talked about this 5th element, Akasha, which is very fundamental to us, because that is why some of the translations given are, they don't call it as sky or space or anything. They call it as ether.
Right.
This ether was something which was propounded in the late 19th century by the physicists because they never understood how it is operating. See, light behaves in a very peculiar manner. And heat also is behaving in a peculiar manner. The sun is millions of miles away from us. But it is able to transfer heat and light to us, going through vacuum. Most of the space is vacuum.
Yeah.
So is it a particle or is it energy?
Could
Because
be
the
both.
moment, yeah, that's the problem. How can it be both? See, see the logic is, can I say that I am a human being and also a donkey?
No, but
Mentally I may be a donkey, that's a different matter. But physically, can you say that to me? So,
no.
so these physicists were confused. Even now they are confused. So that's why they invented terms like as wavicle. Somebody said wave plus particle, wavicle. Because light has a property of refraction on this earth. Heat, you need some medium.
Yes.
You heat for transmission, either it is radiation or convection or conduction. If it is solid, it's called conduction. If it is liquid, it is called as convection. If it is vacuum or if it is space or air, you call it as radiation. None of these things are there, and still the heat of the sun is coming here. So they were all confused. That's why our people, the ancient rishis, coined this term Akasha and called it as a medium for the transmission of consciousness and energy.
Say again, please.
The Akasha as a principle is only an intangible medium for the pervading of consciousness and energy.
Consciousness and energy.
Consciousness is much more subtle than any form of energy. That's why I'm trying to make a difference between the two. Consciousness is energy at one level.
Yeah.
But all energy is not necessarily consciousness in its purest form or in its original form. You understand the point now?
When you have the sunlight and sun heat, it is that medium which is known as Akasha according to the literature.
Yes,
or according
and even before the sun and all, they have talked about for creation itself, you need a medium for manifestation, including the sun to come into being.
Yes. Yes.
So that medium for manifestation is what is called as Akasha.
Very true.
The Akasha Tattva is a very difficult thing to understand. It's so subtle and difficult because see, unfortunately, we are not able to meet in the School of Ancient Wisdom every month as we used to do earlier.
Yeah.
I have identified about 75 points in the Bhagavad Gita which need detailed elaboration and clarification and understanding as an advanced course on the Bhagavad Gita Bhashya. So, Akasha Tattva is one of them, which needs this kind of elaboration.
Along with it, also what we call Akashic records. So
yes, that's also medium only. It is a storage medium.
So there is a storage in the medium.
Yeah, there is a mechanism.
That's very complex.
There is a mechanism. See, when they talk about cloud computing now, cloud computing is not cloud computing. They are taking away and created a huge facility for data storage at different points on this earth. Like Google has a center where it can store huge, unimaginable amount of data. so that your computer is free from that storage problem.
Mm.
So in the case of the computer, it's not actually cloud computing or cloud storage because there's actually a physical mechanism to store it. Here, it is a non-physical mechanism for storage because it is of the nature of consciousness and energy. So that energy gets converted into matter at the appropriate time. That's as simple as that. How does it happen? We can't, yeah.
As you said, this aspect of Akasha and Akashic record and many other such things does need elaborate contemplation, because it's very complex.
More importantly, personal interaction, because you are now able to become nameless and formless through webinars, because none of you is showing your face. But when we are interacting in the School of Ancient Wisdom, I can look at each of you and see who is understanding and who is not understanding, like in a classroom. Why classroom interaction is important is the person imparting the information will be able to see the other person and decide whether he has actually understood or not understood.
Agree.
Yeah, Ramchandranji. Yes.
This coming to the back to the verse, the merger, that is the subjective world merging in the subjective entity. So how do we understand this? It's
no, there's no merger as such.
It's not physical.
There is no. See, again, the same problems are there. They are using certain terms which should not be understood as physical merger or something actually happening.
That's why I said understanding. You said
your perception of it will make the unity more real than the diversity.
Yes, that means
that's what it is.
Against unreal.
Yes, so the whole thing is this appears unreal and that appears real to you.
Yes, that's right.
So that reality, that is where when it is said that Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya, that the Jagat is Mithya is perceived only when you come to that state when you know that the Brahman is one, is Satyam.
Satyam, yes.
That is the point. And this doesn't vanish. This universe or this manifested world will be there, but it becomes irrelevant to you.
Yes.
It no longer holds your attention. It no longer binds you. It no longer creates any resistance and attachment, as you mentioned, when Janaki Ramji said, these two non-attachment and non-resistance automatically happen.
Yes.
Okay.
It's high level of seeing the world, objects.
No, it is actually the true level of seeing. We have unfortunately fallen into a state where we are not able to see it, but that is the truth. That is the actuality. So you need to wake up to that consciousness. Then this world becomes a dream.
Very true.
That's what.
Krishnapani ji?
Yeah.
Umesh brought up this topic about Akashic records. But I think the reason for even calling it Akashic records is purely to understand the nature of the Akasha. So that's why Akashic records. I don't think it has any. I mean, it's just the vastness of it. It's the undivided.
There is another dimension to it which I'm not talking right now, because there are beings and beings in operation in the subtler worlds.
Right. Yeah.
We are only thinking of everything like human aspect only.
Yeah.
There are beings, other beings, there are greater beings, beings which are much subtler, which are different in nature totally to what we understand as the human being.
Yeah.
So those beings are actually handling all this. They are called as the Lipikas, the Karma Devatas. In the Buddhist scripture and all, they called it Lipikas, and the Hindu, the Indian, the Sanatana Dharma tradition called them as Karma Devatas, and they have called him as Yamaraja. Yama is a Dharmaraja. He is the Lord of righteousness, and he is called as Samavarti. One of the names given is Samavarti. That means he doesn't discriminate between anything and everything. No discrimination at all.
But sir, most of the people have got that obsession, not realizing the South is Dharmaraja, they avoid Dharmaraja.
Sir, that is the reason why the very important Upanishad, Kathopanishad,
Yes.
has this dialogue between Nachiketa and Yama.
True.
See, we do not understand the fact that Yama is always with us.
Correct.
If you have seen that movie on Adi Shankara,
Yes, I saw that.
beautifully portrayed this.
Yes,
There's a dark fellow always following Adi Shankara.
yes.
And at one point of time, that fellow asked, "Are you not afraid of me?" Then Adi Shankara said, "Why should I be afraid of you? You have been with me all through my childhood. Always you have been there. How can I be afraid of you?" So that is the nature of things which we have to understand. That is living in the moment. That is living in the present. Living in a timeless state. That is the merger which he is talking about. See, the Shastra therefore discriminates between this. A Vidwan and an Avidwan. A Vidwan is one who knows. An Avidwan is one who doesn't know. There's only I think it is at the feet of the master or somewhere he says, in some context there is a mention that there are only two kinds of people, those who know and those who do not know. That's all. Those who know and those who do not know. One who is an Atmavan, who is a Jnani, and the rest are all Ajnanis or Anatma. That is the principle. So an Avidwan cannot know any of these things because the state of his consciousness is such that it can never touch this. In order to come to that, the tradition has talked about sadhana chatushtaya, this and that, and so many other things. That's only a process. Let us not give too much of importance to the process. That is precisely again Jiddu Krishnamurti shunned any form of method or process or procedure or anything like that. He said no. If I tell you about some method or process, you give the process more importance than what is to be given importance.
To be given.
So you live with what is. That very living in the moment and living with what is will lead to the dropping of it and opening up of something else. Don't anticipate what will open up. That is again within the framework of the mind. You understand the point, sir?
Absolutely, sir. Thank you.
So this is more important. That's why intuitive appreciation, sir. A deep appreciation at a different level is required. Otherwise, it will not make any sense at all. If you go verbatim of these shlokas,
yes,
they will, if superficially, they will not make any this thing, and you will not really understand anything. As I said, what is this question of a wise man intelligently merging the whole of the manifestation into the Atman? As I said right at the beginning, how can you merge the known into the unknown? You don't even know about it. So how does it become important to us? So we start with the known and look at the unity in the known. Unity of both, as I said, objective unity and subjective unity.
True. All the verses 31 to 41.
Yes.
Traditional discourse says that it is for Nidityasanam. Therefore, you meditate on this.
Yeah, you meditate on this.
Meditate without understanding.
Yeah, you come to some understanding so that you hold it in your consciousness and it will reveal itself to you.
very
That
that is
is
a real meditation.
yes. And as I again, let us remember Krishnaji, when there's a possibility of misunderstanding the whole thing, because he said meditation is when the meditator is not. When the meditator is there, the meditation doesn't happen at all. When you are there, the other is not there, he said. Because you is the hindrance. It's already 11:30, sir. We could do only one shloka. That's okay. As I said, we are not in a hurry. Because I want, see, unless we are very serious about it, it should not be a superficial study, sir. Let's not try to understand things in our own way. One needs to come to it very seriously, because other than that, there is no other opportunity. There is no possibility.
Very condensed, sir. Very condensed, highly condensed.
Yeah, highly condensed.
And it requires a clear, proper explanation with reality.
Yes. So
otherwise,
yeah,
reading
that's what we are trying to do it. And because all of us are sailing in the same boat, I'm only able to share some of my thoughts and expressions on these factors. And
message.
Yes, sir.
Yesterday I shared a message with you.
Yeah. Yes.
Krishnapani sir.
Yes, sir.
You are elaborating very well, and thank you for that Swami Nikhilanandaji's book.
Yes,
that
sir.
is really helping, supplementing what your explanation adds to that very well.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's a very good book, sir. 1947 book. I think it's still in print.
No, this is easy. We have downloaded, and I'm reading that. Very good.
Yeah, I'm also doing the same thing. I have also downloaded it only. Yeah. And the print is also good. You can expand it and read it.
Yeah, on the computer it's quite easy. Now I have come up to verse 50.
Oh, very good, sir. So, shall we close, Beenaji?
We can close. We just need somebody to do the Loka Samasta. By the way, the school is having a get-together on the 6th and 7th of February. I think you must have all got the WhatsApp message. So those of you who are willing to physically to the school, please make arrangements. So, thank you so much.
I understand that Colonel Arjun Bahadur is coordinating.
That's right.
The program. Right. So thank you very much, Sumanji. You will be able to do the Loka Samasta?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Loka Samasta Sukhi Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhi Bhavantu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we meet again for Bodha next Sunday. And it may not happen actually because we have the school program. Paniji, I'll let you know.
Yeah, please let me know.
Yeah.
Accordingly, we'll do it. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.